Okay. How are we doing?
Good morning. Oh, it's morning somewhere anyway.
It's morning
Good.
somewhere.
That's what I say all the time.
We have Bubba Husky with us to comment with us as we talk about Billy Graham and the moral majority. We were discussing earlier, though, that the Reds blessedly swept the Pirates, as I was informed
You had to
by
go there,
you.
did you?
I did.
Start out there.
We've been starting with baseball talk a little bit. Sometimes I don't know. I'm not
Because
mad
I
about it.
love the game.
Yeah, I'm not mad about it.
And today was Jackie Robinson Day.
Yes. We're going to talk about some racism stuff today. So there's a couple of sections. I heard you listening to that video that I sent you.
Yeah, that was. I was trying to follow a link, and I clicked on that one, and that wasn't what I was listening to. I was trying to get to the messages thing.
Gotcha. Right.
Went to the wrong thing. So.
Did you find it?
Yes.
You have the chat. Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
There's nothing on it. There were 3, and rotated it, and now it's gone. So there'll be more.
All right. Well, Bubba, how are you doing today? Let's see what Bubba has to say. See what's gone on in Bubba's life. Or I guess we're going to see how quick this all responds too. Of course, he may have stepped away. I could be just.
He may not. He may have heard Reds and said, "I'm out of here."
Yeah, he could have said that.
I forgot about all the love of the Reds in Oak Ridge at that church when I was there.
Yeah, there was a lot of Reds fans there. I think that's my grandfather was leading that charge.
He was big time.
Yeah,
and he's a big man, so
he was important. He was an important member of the Trinity Methodist Church in Oak Ridge, First United Trinity,
and a big man.
He was a big man. You considered him big?
Was he not? Oh no, I'm thinking of Lawrence.
No, Lawrence Losh. Yeah, that was a big dude. Yeah. My papa. I mean, he wasn't small. He's a 6-foot guy.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of Lawrence Losh.
Yeah,
for some reason.
Yeah, so
huge Reds fans also.
Yes, there was a contingency, and it part of my indoctrination. I think. So let's. Speaking of which, we are talking about Christian nationalism. We have watched a video by this lady, Christy Burke, and I've realized I spelled her name wrong up here. Let's put her name right. Christy Burke. And
Bubba's, I'm here.
She is. Yeah, he is here. We watched her first. Like she did. This is a 4-part video for her. We skipped the introduction. Went to like the first part of the history, part 1. Now we're gonna do the part 2, and this is the early part was kind of like the foundations, right? And this is more as we get into like the modern day, right? We're not too modern day Christian nationalism. We are still setting up more foundations, but this will be more relevant to
right, yeah,
our time, and kind of like how we got here, in terms of like why folks are you as a pastor are an anti-Christian nationalist pastor, right?
Yes,
and
we have been since before as a pastor.
Yeah. So you're going to have an opportunity to talk about some of these folks and how it was all set up, and we'll talk about the civil rights movement a little bit because Billy Graham was actually a part of that in his own way, and then kind of also backed out, which also there was a ripple effect because of that. So
yeah,
I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and fire
share
it up.
The screen.
Yeah. Oh, share it. Yeah, that's right. I got to do that part.
That's what happens when you're starting out, isn't it?
Yes, can you see that?
I can now. Keep your mouth open.
Yes, she is like imminently about to talk.
On the
Okay.
verge of speech.
Yeah, here we go.
I have been wanting to make this episode for so long, and we are finally here. When I tell you that this deep dive on Christian nationalism has been my obsession, I mean it.
Well, you know what? Before, just as a reminder, this is a well, she'll describe maybe a little. She would describe herself a little bit as somebody who might have been born into a right wing Christian nationalist message, and now has deconstructed into full atheism.
Yeah.
Right. So she, the name of her channel is Jezebel Vibes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
The other day, I woke up from a dream where I was just repeating places and names and dates related to this project. So this has been the only thing on my mind, and I'm really eager to finally share with you everything that I've learned. If you haven't seen the first episode, I talked about the founding fathers and whether or not they intended to institute a Christian nation. Then we kind of talked about how Christianity fueled the westward expansion and the destruction that came with it. And now we're going to fast forward to the mid 20th century. And throughout that entire time, Christian nationalism was persisting. It was just growing with the times. And the Bible was perpetually used to defend a lot of terrible things in our American history. And I don't think that we should ignore that. But from where I'm standing, what really fueled the modern day culture wars and political divide that I'm seeing between the left and the right was this turn of the century, this time when the evangelicals teamed up with the Republicans or the conservatives, and they got married, and they created this kind of crazy, huge superpower that took over the minds of American people. And it was from this point that I think so much of our modern day division was born from. And that's just my opinion, but I'm going to take you through it. And
That's her opinion. Do you have an early opinion?
So is she talking about the 50s or is she talking about the 70s?
We'll be talking about the 50s.
Because I don't know that. So one of the things that I recall, not from my memory, because I wasn't around then either, is
Well, in fairness, I think eventually we get to that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say in the 50s there was still this belief in the church that you just don't do politics in the church, and there were even folks that believed that Christians shouldn't vote because they should stay out of politics.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
I've never heard that at all.
I've heard it a few times, but even then, it was that they should, don't talk about politics in the church. Don't talk about politics with your friends. If you're a Christian, you keep those things separate. And the what I would say, I'm not saying she's wrong. I do think that there was already movement, but the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, or the Democrat Party, were a little flipped back then.
Yeah. The Southern strategy. I think she gets into that eventually, but before that, before the Civil Rights Movement, that's 64, right? So
yeah, all throughout the 60s.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King was,
or 65.
The bill was signed. Yeah.
Yeah. Brown versus Board of Education was 50s, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right.
So like these, so this is still part of the whole, civil rights movement, so to speak, right? Segregation is desegregation, huge part of that.
Well, segregation was a big part of, and then Christians made all kinds of silly arguments about why that was important.
Sure. Yeah. She's going to go into that. And I think that's where we get into Billy Graham and the rest of them.
All right.
You can decide at the end of this what you think. Okay, so I think we need to set the stage. And I really don't think that we can talk about the rise of Christian nationalism without talking about the
Hello,
Cold
Jess.
War. And the Cold War was a period of global geopolitical tension and struggle for ideological and economic influence between the United States and the Soviet Union, USSR. And the term Cold War is actually used because there was no direct fighting between the two superpowers, though each supported opposing sides in major regional conflicts known as proxy wars. The struggle for dominance was expressed indirectly via psychological warfare, propaganda campaigns, espionage, far-reaching embargoes, sports diplomacy, and technological competitions such as the space race. Now, because there was this kind of rising threat of authoritarian style communism, which kind of feels like an oxymoron to me, but because there was this kind of rising.
I mean, it's not an oxymoron, though. Authoritarianism can be in, a lot of stuff, but I get what I get what she's trying to say.
The oxymoron is communism at its core is that the people rule.
Right, yeah, right. So, yes, I get what she's saying, but
but yeah, it has never existed in a way that
somebody's in charge. Somebody's in charge somewhere.
Yeah,
or something.
It's always been that way.
Threat. The United States felt like they needed to kind of fight this and to keep communism from taking over the entire world. They were afraid that if these countries fell to communism that were surrounding the Soviet Union, that eventually it would just kind of spread out into the rest of the world, and the United States would eventually fall to it as well. So the United States used a political strategy called containment, and this was pursued during the Cold War to prevent the spread of communism. The goal was to go out into the world and to keep other nations from falling to communism so that it we could kind of stop the spread. So this was an ideological battle. It was
the Truman Doctrine.
And things like USAID came out of it.
Well, idea. Yes, but
not that specifically. But
I would call the USAID like good things. I call the Truman Doctrine, probably not great overall.
Well, yeah, I mean, a part of the way we keep down authoritarianism today and keeping allies
is with napalm bombs.
No, by going in and helping the hungry folks and
yeah. But the dark side of that is you keep the spread of communism away by napalm bombs like Vietnam, right?
Right. That went over well.
Yeah.
It's not just about land or being overrun. It was about keeping the threat of communism away from the United States because we had developed our own system. We liked our capitalism. We liked our free market, and we did not want to entertain the thought of communism. It was inherently godless culture, and the United States was not a godless country. And I think it's really important to remember as we talk about these things, something very important, which is that two things can be true. Not enough people live with that mentality, and I was not a person who lived like that for a long time. We tend to think in black and white, absolute thinking, but two things really can be true at the same time. While the political philosophy of communism did lead to authoritarian regimes, Americans were also fed a very steady diet of exaggerated fears and propaganda. And what we started doing is portraying anything that strayed from traditional American ways as communist, evil, bad, dangerous. And communism wasn't just a geopolitical threat. It was an atheistic moral danger.
So I think this is crazy right here. Christianity or communism, they're like so totally unrelated altogether. But this was
they are completely unrelated.
And one might even say that Jesus would have been like pro a communist, socialist system. So it's just at this point this is
he wouldn't have been pro authoritarianism, but he would have been pro communalism.
I mean, this is, Yeah.
The Acts church was,
The what church?
everybody had everything. The church in the book of Acts.
Oh, Acts. Yeah.
The idea was that everybody held all things in common. And, and there's two people in that story that were, lost their lives because they didn't sell everything they owned and joined the commune.
What is the story? I don't remember this one.
It's in the book of Acts.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think that my Bible knowledge is okay, but like I'm just not remembering which. So there's a story in the Bible where
it's in the book of Acts, and
they don't join the commune, and then who kills them?
I mean, I'm certainly oversimplifying it. I think that was I would have to get the specifics on that, but I think they were essentially stoned to death.
So the community.
So
so
were
people
stoned by the community.
they didn't join the commune. So I don't even know how to take this.
Well, no, they were a part of it. They were a part of it all, but they hadn't sold all that they, part of joining, of being a part of it.
I got it. So they didn't buy in all the way. They wanted to keep some things for themselves.
Right.
So how do we even get to the prosperity gospel with stuff like that in there?
I think the prosperity gospel.
I don't think that like this story, if I don't know it very well, the Acts story that we're talking about is I don't think that that's good.
No, I remember reading it was not a good thing either.
Were there things? What did you read in seminary, or is it just like your standard reading?
It's there in Acts. I'll try to look it up while we're talking.
No, but where did you like hear? I mean, like
when I first.
I guess what I'm saying is, were there things in seminary that just like made your eyebrows curl?
No, because I went to a seminary that would, by most people, be considered liberal. Went to Emory University in Atlanta and at Candler School of Theology, and we were allowed to think.
Yeah,
we were encouraged to think. We were encouraged to challenge what we saw, and if we had questions or debates, we were to talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't think that we had any reason to think otherwise, to be chastised for what we thought.
I don't want to get too much in. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this one Bible story, but I would just be curious what your first reaction, because mine is like, yeah, this is a different kind of like authoritarianism, and this would be like an example in the Bible where the people that are like anti-communism would be like, listen, they'll kill you, you know what I mean? Like you don't give away all your stuff, they'll kill you. Right. So if we're taking it in this way, but I know that there's a lot of different ways to interpret the Bible.
I mean, the overall concept, though, was that, we shared things in common so that we could help the widow, we could the hungry, we could do the things that you would agree with.
Yes. So this is another time that the Bible, like, basically, I think they're trying to say like this is the righteous way to be, but also death and fire if not. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Rocks. We'll throw rocks at you.
Yeah, seriously. All right. Let's move it on.
Which is how it was framed. Again, this became a war of ideology. And instead of framing the threat accurately, which there was a threat, there was a concern, but instead of framing it accurately, politicians and political leaders found it a lot easier to kind of play the blame game. And instead of blaming the real problem, the regimes that were abusing their power, The United States took a different approach. It is because of our moral decline that we have fallen victim to this communist atheist threat. And so we have to get right with God as a nation in order to fight it. It became a spiritual battle.
Proper way then to look upon communism is to see in it a judgment of God.
In the 1950s, according to Gallup surveys, 90%, over 90% of the adult population identified as Christian. So it's very easy to see how a campaign against communism could kind of be turned into a campaign against an atheistic moral threat when the people that you're instilling this fear in are already afraid of an atheistic moral threat. I mean, this is why we added "In God We Trust" to our dollar. This is why we added "Under God" to our pledge. "In God We Trust" is the official motto of the United States, but it was adopted by U.S. Congress in 1956. And at the same time, the words "Under God" were added to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Give me your opinion on that.
So it's interesting. I had a lady in my church who was, I made that comment that these things came in the 50s under the Eisenhower administration. And she sent me a link to something that showed this penny in the 1800s that had "In God We Trust" on it. See, we did it before then. No, it wasn't made an official thing, and it wasn't put on our currency on all of our currency until that time. But she's arguing that no, this has been around for that much longer. I personally happen to like "E Pluribus Unum" because that, as a Christian, would certainly seem more like that I would want to be a part of. Putting "In God We Trust" on money always seemed weird to me.
Yeah, especially considering.
I mean, from the beginning.
Yeah, just
especially considering the God we're trusting is money at this point.
Right. So there's an overall symbolic problem, right? If you're a Jesus guy, right? If you're a Jesus guy, if you're one of the there's Christians out there I would claim that are not Jesus guys, right?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I saw some interviewing. There's a little Scottish, Irish, I can't remember which he is, reporter for CNN, and he's doing a documentary on
Donny O'Brien. Yeah,
exactly. So Irish, I guess. He was interviewing this guy, and the guy, I mean, at one point he's like, "Oh yeah, we can get along, but I'm right." But then at next point, and you're the enemy. You're the one that has done this, and so he's like, what happened here? And he says, I'm coming to you, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's Christian, man. Look it up. It's in Leviticus. And I'm like, well, look up what Jesus said, dude. If you want to be claiming Christian, he said, an eye for an eye. You've heard that. But let me tell you, love your enemy. That's Christian.
Right. So I mean, it's a complete contradiction in the book, right?
Yeah. And Jews don't. It's a complete contradiction if what you're saying is that it's all written by one person. It is a contradiction naturally, but it's not one person contradicting themselves.
Sure.
It is people in one culture saying this is the way we do things, and then Jesus coming along and saying no, we don't do things that way.
Right, but
I don't think it's
we claim it as one work though, even though it's multiple.
We claim it as but the word Bible library.
It's fair enough. There are books of the Bible.
Yeah, I don't go to the library and think all the books there are written by one person.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't even. There's books in the Bible that aren't even written by one person. Most of them.
But I mean, there's that whole divinely inspired, or the people that will even just say every word written is the exact word, right?
Yeah, and then if you believe that, if that's your belief, then the negotiation you have to have with the Bible, the conversation you have to have with yourself is, well, the Bible says this and it says this, so how do I decide which one is true? And, for me, I don't have to make that decision. Jesus said, I'm going to correct this for you.
All right.
That's how I see it.
Fair enough.
So it's yes, there are tons of people out there that will tell you what you just said. There's that univocality of the Bible is the one way to put that. a long, long time ago, I did a Sunday school teaching shop, and a guy drew a line, and he said, "Here's the Bible, and here's the way people see the Bible. On one of the line, one end is that you are somebody who believes what you just described, that every word in here is written by the finger of God.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end is, and he called that the Word of God. On the other end is words about God. It is that something you would probably certainly agree with, that these are books that were written to try to teach people about the concept of God. And you can get into specifics about that. But, and then people in your Sunday school classes or people in any study are going to fall somewhere on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Either they know it's a book of, my sister would tell me, what's a book of literature? And then she would say, not even middle literature sometimes. But it's important literature. Other folks would say, oh, God wrote every word. And most of us fall somewhere in that. Most Christians fall somewhere in the middle on that.
Yeah.
Because it would be possible to walk that tightrope all the time. If, oh, here's one verse that says this, and I got this verse that says that.
You'd be instantly put in a knot.
Yeah, and let me say, all of us make some negotiation.
Sure.
One way or the other.
Well, we've said
because there are things the Bible says.
Yeah.
The Bible speaks of slavery. That's the most obvious one. It does speak of chattel slavery. It's not some other form.
Right.
It's owning people and selling them off, and it's exactly what you think it is. And it doesn't commit.
I mean, we've said time and again, that you have to cherry pick the Bible. It's the only sane thing to do. Right.
Right. We make
Right. We're going to learn a lot about a person. We're going to learn a lot about a person by what they cherry pick.
Oh, yeah, big time. I had a lady came in my office one time to find out about me. So she cherry picked the questions she wanted to ask. What do you think about abortion? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And if I didn't answer the questions, I was not valid to be her pastor.
Mm. Okay.
So I was not valid to be her pastor.
I think it's interesting that, well, we'll get into that another time, but like people shop in churches, shopping your echo chamber.
This was a symbol of America standing with God. And it was a symbol that we were a people of faith and we were standing against regimes that were faithless. And so this period was actually called the Red Scare. And it was the second Red Scare. The first one was earlier in the 1900s. And a Red Scare is a form of moral panic provoked by fear of the rise, supposed or real, of leftist ideologies in a society, especially communism and socialism. Historically, Red Scares have led to mass political persecution, scapegoating, and the ousting of those in government positions who have had connections with left-wing or far-left ideology. The second Red Scare occurred after World War II, this is what we're talking about now, and is known as McCarthyism after its best-known advocate, Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthyism coincided with an increased and widespread fear of communist espionage that was consequent of the increasing tension in the Cold War. McCarthy stirred up further fear in the United States of communists infiltrating the country by saying that communist spies were omnipresent. In 1950, Joseph McCarthy addressed the Senate, citing 81 separate cases and made accusations against suspected communists. Although he provided little or no evidence, this prompted the Senate to call for a full investigation. He started targeting people in Hollywood and federal employees, and he caused a lot of people to lose their jobs, and he ruined a lot of lives. And so this prompted the Lavender Scare, which was moral panic about homosexual people in the United States government, which led to their mass dismissal from government service during the mid-20th century. It contributed to and paralleled an anti-communist campaign, which is known as McCarthyism, and the second Red Scare. Gay men and lesbians were said to be a national security risk, and communist sympathizers.
We don't like it. It must be communist.
Yeah, that's right.
Call to remove them from state employment. It was thought that gay people were more susceptible to being manipulated, which could pose a threat to the country. Now, none of this was true, of course, and it turned out to be a completely unnecessary culture war and caused a lot of people to lose their jobs, and it ruined a lot of lives. So here are American people who are just trying to live their lives, but they're being told that there is this authoritarian communist takeover all throughout the world, and they're coming for us, and we need to fight back. And the only way to fight back is if we get spiritually right with God, is if we stand as a nation under God fighting atheistic communism. And this brings me to Billy Graham, who once said, either communism must die or Christianity must die, because it is actually...
What?
Where did that come from? Wow.
This is I think she cites this book a lot called Jesus and John Wayne.
I think I've heard that title.
Yeah.
Actually a battle between Christ and Antichrist. Billy Graham was an American evangelist. He was an ordained Southern Baptist minister and a civil rights advocate. We'll get to that one in a minute. Whose broadcasts and world tours featuring live sermons became well known in the mid to late 20th century. Throughout his career spanning over 6 decades, Graham rose to prominence as an evangelical Christian figure in the United States
Carly,
and abroad.
you got it right.
Kind of going back to our first episode where we talked about this kind of romanticization of cowboy culture, the rugged, masculine, good-looking cowboy that's out to save the world. I think Graham really kind of fit into this picture of what a Christian man was supposed to look like and act like. He was good looking. He was hyper masculine. He was very charismatic and very bold.
Billy Graham, hyper masculine.
I think you'd have to ask a woman, because I don't see that. But then you have to ask a woman who was around in the 50s.
I mean, in fairness, there's people that say that about old Trumpy. Dumpy Trumpy.
Yeah. And by the way, Bubba, that's me asking, not Luke. It just shows up as Luke.
Well, yeah. If you use the social or the ninja that I got there, it's going to answer in YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook.
And that seems to be the only option I have. So
yeah, the other option would be to just answer in like Facebook, and it'll come up on the chat. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folk. We were still learning.
And Graham actually admitted that before he got saved, he believed that religion was, quote unquote, for sissies, and that he was just more concerned with playing his sports than being a Christian. But he did eventually get saved. He became a born-again Christian, and then he started preaching all over the country. But I really want to address this claim on Wikipedia that he was a civil rights activist. He was actually close friends with Martin Luther King Jr. And at the beginning, there was a time when he would have these segregated audiences at his sermons, and he would go down into the audience and he would remove the rope that separated the Black audience from the white audience. So he was doing things that were very progressive for his time, and I think it's important that we recognize that. But with Billy Graham, he truly believed, like with everything else, that racism was a heart problem. It was not a systemic issue. It wasn't a government issue. It was something in the hearts of people. And that if we could just kind of change the hearts of people and bring everybody back to Jesus, that we would have no more racism.
Do you think that a problem in the modern church is that do you think a lot of modern churches think that they're solving problems with their lip service? As in, we can just think kind thoughts and pray about it.
That's a good question. I think I think that's an oversimplification of laziness. I think more likely what is going on in that regard. Carlos says yes, but
well, you know, me and
I said earlier,
we'd be jiving.
I mean, I know people in my churches and in other churches that I've dealt with that truly believe there's more to do, but then when it comes to putting the rubber to the road, so to speak, that costs money, or that requires effort and time and energy. I don't have either of those things, or I don't want to put money in that, or, money is mission begins at home, so we don't need to give to the thing that's happening in Africa or across the country, or something like we'll help the folks that were affected by Hurricane Helene because it's here in our own backyard, but we're not going to help the folks that were in California or in Washington State where
I don't think I have hate for people that prioritize
FEMA just refused to help them.
Yeah, I have a bigger problem with the people that like would spread like misinformation about it than I would the people that would say,
absolutely.
Than I would the people that say I'm going to prioritize the stuff in my backyard.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and that makes sense. We're more connected with the things in our backyard. But I would say this: not just Christians, all activists. When pushed to, for instance, open a home, we have a homeless problem, so we need to have more homeless shelter. We need to build housing that we can put housing that gives an opportunity for low income housing. Don't put it near me.
Right. They don't want
not in my backyard.
Yeah, find a place away from me. It's
right.
Boy, that's very frustrating.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, I was driving through Oak Ridge this couple 2 weekends ago, and like, boy, this place ain't what it used to be.
Oak Ridge
housing.
Oh, yeah. Housing. Okay, yeah. Oak Ridge
housing.
We're gonna get very local here, but the Oak Ridge housing situation is Oak Ridge had probably a pretty unique problem in which that it was a city that came up out of nowhere, and in the I guess it was a project in the 40s is when I should know this about my hometown. It started in the 41.
Come on, Carla, give us the numbers. Yeah, 41 is about right.
Right?
If anybody saw Oppenheimer, they know.
Yeah. I didn't see Oppenheimer. I need to see Oppenheimer, but
they only mention Oak Ridge once. So. It was started then, and then you had all these government-built houses that were all the same. It's built in 5 different little communities, and they were segregated communities.
At the time, these are very middle-class houses. You do have. But so Oak Ridge as a city, its new housing as the city grew older would develop on the perimeters of the town, and then so then you have all those old folks like my grandmother and my grandfather we've talked about. They were all living in the middle of town in those ABCD letter houses, right? And a lot of them all died around the same time or moved into the old folks home around the same time. And then there was a glut of houses that kind of opened up at the same time. And you do have some efforts to like modernize those houses, but man, there's so many of them.
And they're ridiculously the cost of them is ridiculous for what they are. So
nowadays, but at one point you could go in.
And you could buy them cheap.
Get a letter house pretty cheap. Now you had it was a fixer upper.
Yeah, it was from the beginning.
Sure. All right, let's move on with
because they weren't meant to last.
Yeah, actually, I kind of disagree with that. Those letter houses they kind of had some good bones to them in a lot of ways.
But they really weren't meant to last. They really were not meant to be there long term. But they were.
Yeah, but I mean, here we are.
Carla's done research.
Yeah, I mean, Carla's gonna know.
And so because of this, he really opposed the idea of utilizing the federal government to enforce civil rights. He just thought that we needed to work within the communities and get people to stop being racist. And I think maybe at first he had really good intentions. And that because of his ideologies, because of his worldview, he just saw a different way. And I don't know that going across America and getting everybody to be Christian was going to be the way to cure racism, since there were a lot of Christians who were supporting segregation at the time. But that is what he believed. And, and so I consider that when I think about Billy Graham and his support or lack of support as time went on, because he just saw things differently. But it doesn't mean that what he did was right. And it gets a little worse as time goes on. In 1958, Billy Graham preached a sermon where he was arranged to be introduced by Texas State Governor Price Daniel, who was a loud and proud voice in favor of maintaining segregation laws. And while campaigning in 1956, he often denounced forced integration, as he called it, and promised to use his power as governor to preserve segregation. And so he was being arranged to be introduced or to introduce Billy Graham at his sermon in 1958. Now, this obviously is going to cause tensions between Billy Graham and his friend Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King actually wrote to Billy Graham a few days before this sermon. And he said, "If Governor Daniels identifies with you on the eve of the Democratic primary, July 26th, in which Mr. Daniel is seeking re-election, it can be well interpreted as your endorsement of racial segregation and discrimination." I mean, he's not really wrong. Imagine being in Martin Luther King Jr.'s shoes. You're friends with a very, very famous, popular evangelical pastor who is quite ahead of his time and removing the ropes so that he can integrate his audience. And then you find out that Billy Graham is working alongside a governor who is actively fighting against desegregation. And in 1963, Martin Luther King penned what is now a famous letter from the jail in Birmingham, Alabama. And in it, he expressed frustrations with the fact that even though his movement was nonviolent, it was being met with a lot of violence. And he said, "You deplore the demonstrations that are presently taking place in Birmingham, but I am sorry that your statement did not express a similar concern for the conditions that brought the demonstrations into being.
Right.
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." And in response to this letter, Billy Graham said that he needed to pump the brakes. And at this point, Billy Graham...
See, this is that...
It was affecting politically.
Right, but this is also like Billy Graham flexing a little bit. Like, I'm the white pastor here. You need to pump the brakes. Right? I'm the big name here.
Yeah, but it's protecting Billy Graham is why.
Right. It's unfortunate.
Like
He's
many
not,
other
he's not
evangelical
looking out for King.
No.
He's not looking out for King. He's looking out for Billy Graham.
Yep.
at the time, white evangelicals at the time, believed that the civil rights movement was just going too far, that they didn't need to ask the government to intervene, that was just a step in the wrong direction, and that we just needed to keep, trying to change the hearts of people. And so meanwhile, while Black people are being discriminated against, while children are being mobbed by dogs and sprayed with water cannons, you have these white evangelicals that are like, well, we just need to keep praying and, preaching, and eventually things will change. But, don't get violent. Don't go against the government. No, we don't want the civil disobedience. And don't expect the government to come in and help you. We've got to fix this on our own. And so that's just really a slap in the face to the entire movement when you see that there are people that are being treated incredibly cruelly and unfairly, and that you don't think it's a good idea for the government to step in to protect them, even though that same government protects you from being harassed and discriminated against. It just seems really unfair. And it was a very privileged position for a lot of evangelical Christians to take. The thing is, I don't think that Billy Graham had bad intentions most of the time, at least not at first. I think that he was deeply indoctrinated. I think he was guided more by religious thinking, and he was shaped by a worldview of magical solutions rather than actual tangible realities. There's a quote in Jesus and John Wayne about this kind of waning of support from white evangelical Christians for civil rights. And it says, by backing away from their support for civil rights, evangelicals like Graham ended up giving cover to more extremist sentiments within the insurgent religious right. I think
Billy, I think that this is kind of like a moment where you're going to get a lot of fracturing, in the church, and a lot of seeds are sown for maybe a move, huh?
You mean for Christian nationalism, as those that supported?
Yeah, but also
So
like a
do you,
split between like guys like you and guys like them, and it almost becomes like two different religions. For me,
yeah,
I was raised in your version of the religion, which I eventually moved away from. But what I'm saying is that I feel like that, like, this is such a huge divide between, I don't know, I guess maybe the more progressive Christians versus the conservative Christians, and it's almost not the same religion.
I feel that way a lot. Um, I had a woman in one of my churches that I left, moved to another appointment, and we were chatting uh, sometime later, and said about the new pastor. I'm not sure he and I worship the same God. Uh,
What was he? I mean, what was his?
and he was very fundamentalist,
Yeah.
and he was more. I don't want to say he was more hellfire and damnation, but he was more. He spent a lot more time on sinfulness of people, and he spent more time on the judgment
Hmm.
side of things than I would ever spend, and
Do you,
less time talking about love.
as a pastor who is more into, like, the love side of the Bible, right, or the Christian
Yeah,
message, um,
sure.
if you do you like for me as a musician, I'm like, well, there's certain kinds of music that um I don't produce that kind of music. I don't listen to that kind of music, but I look at what they're doing, and I ask myself, do they aim and hit their target, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
And,
get that.
and then I can make like a more objective kind of like, look. When you see other pastors that are going down like a different style, more of the fire and brimstone stuff that you would say, damnation stuff. Um, do you have like do you have a similar kind of like appreciation where you can look and say, hey, are they aiming and hitting the mark that they're trying to aim, and still appreciate it, or do you just like say, hey, man, this person is going about it the wrong way?
So, uh, yes and no. I think if the message is so harsh, no, I don't. I don't notice that as much, because I'm too distracted by the harsh nature of the message. But I would say two things, two different paths than the rest of it, though. Yes, if somebody is doing a good job of hitting that target, as you said, um, because they are skilled at preaching, or really
Mm-hmm.
taking something and interpreting it in a way that helps people understand what they're trying to say, um, rather than manipulating it even more, because sometimes it's just flat out manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're able to do that and also at the same time understand that love is a part of it all,
Sure.
then okay, I can appreciate and even respect the skill of that person. A good example of somebody who I think misses the mark but is very skilled would be Joel Osteen.
Mm-hmm.
He's compelling to watch.
I mean, we're talking about Billy
Uh,
Graham, right? So,
yeah, and I didn't, I'm not old enough to remember Billy Graham much,
right.
uh, and
But
and his style of preaching would not be mine.
there are modern day Billy Grahams, right? And when I say modern day Billy Grahams, like,
You
even
mean they
people,
had draw a big crowd?
yeah, but they're also like, I don't know. Um, they draw a big crowd, but they preach that similar kind of like, it still falls into this like Christian nationalist message.
So one of the things I would argue in defense of Billy Graham is my experience with him more was uh, later when he wasn't doing the Crusades, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is that alone should raise some eyebrows. but when he wasn't doing the Billy Graham Crusades, and he was still doing answering people's questions in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
A newspaper is where they use this paper that is made of, pressed.
Yeah, yeah. For the kids,
for the younger
kids on
folks, for the kids.
Twitch, right? Yeah.
That's right. But so I think Billy Graham, she mentioned that he seemed a little more aggressive, and in some ways he was. I remember him writing back to a woman who was talking about her child being gay, and his message back to her was basically, "You love your child.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do."
Right, and
so I think
this is where he's on the right side of things, right?
yeah, and he wasn't necessarily where I am. He's not. He's still moderate on those issues at
Right.
best. I mean, he was, but he came with compassion and empathy before he came with, "I'm going to teach you the right way to do things." So I give Billy Graham that kind of credit, and I should say Billy Graham up to a certain point. There was a point when he shifted, and I'll tell you about that later.
Okay.
But it has absolutely to do with Christian nationalism and the marriage of two Christian evangelical Christianity and the Republican Party.
Yeah. The right-wing movement.
I think that Billy Graham wanted to see change. I really do, but I think he was blinded by his religious ideologies. He was blinded by his fear of communism and his distrust of the government. And he cared more about preaching his religious message than he did about the lives and the well-being of his own friends and the people he claimed to love in the name of Jesus. And to me, this perfectly illustrates a lot of modern Christians that don't want to stand for civil rights, that don't want to involve themselves in the woke agenda, as a lot of them say, because they just don't feel like the government needs to be involved in protecting gay people, protecting Black people, protecting women, protecting those that are vulnerable. A lot of people just don't think that we need to involve the government in that. And I just think that this is a perfect mirror of what we're seeing today. So many people that are apathetic or even resistant to social change within our government. Because I think a lot of them refuse to accept that there is a systemic problem a lot of the time. And I would just like to point out before we move on from Billy Graham that according to several reports, his worth when he died was about $25 million. So, but I think if we just take all of the information leading up to our next...
Does that have an effect on you? Should a pastor leave the parish with $25 million?
Well, I would say, first off, Billy Graham wasn't ever pastor of a church.
Okay.
So
yeah.
He was pastor of an organization. He was an evangelist, so therefore he went out and did his own thing.
He did his own thing.
Well,
yeah, you can still answer the question.
But he also established an institution and that stuff, and he wrote books, and he did stuff that raised money for himself, that personal gain.
Which I think that's fine, right? But the thing is,
I can't imagine
he's still using the religion for that, though, right?
Yes, but if I wrote a book, could make money writing a book, I might take some of that money.
Yeah.
Let me say this: that money should be taxed. That money should be, if he's not actually serving a congregation, that's different. And he created an organization that at its core is also political.
So you think the organization, as well as his obviously his own personal, right?
Yeah. Now,
should all churches be taxed?
The pastor should. No, I don't think so. And I think any other nonprofit organization, they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, should a pastor make millions? Carla would say, sure, why not? Because, that'd help us out.
Sure, yeah. This podcast is going to
But
blow up, Billy.
most
We're going to make
pastors,
millions.
no. So in 1995, I became elder in the United Methodist Church, which is the highest status of clergy that you can gain. And we had a minimum salary.
Yeah.
And in the district I was serving, I was at minimum salary for an elder. We had local pastors who didn't go to seminary. We had deacons deacons who were people that were just where I was 2 years before in the district. I was at that time in my fourth year as a pastor in the top 5 in my district in salary.
Okay.
In 1995, I was making $27,000.
Hey, what was this?
The
So
total
like
package.
40 today, something like that.
Yeah. Well,
Ish.
minimum salary is over. So it's not like there's a lot of pastors out there.
They're just raking it in. Yeah, I mean,
they're raking it in.
As Carla said, a lot of them are receiving SNAP benefits, and
That's right. And or have the number of pastors who are part-time in every denomination is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're working other jobs at the same time. We're not talking about people that are full-time mostly.
In rural places especially, yeah.
Especially, but also in urban places. We have a lot of churches that are little churches that are the 15 people that are there,
Mm-hmm.
the 30 people that are there. So yes, if you're making millions, we have a church in our denomination that was planning on a long-term fundraising project, and a big part of it was they were building a new sanctuary, which was going to be worth a lot, going to cost an awful lot of money. But they were also at the same time raising money so that in the next, and it was a long, long time. They were talking about, in the next 50 years, we will spend $1 billion in missions.
Mm-hmm.
So some churches are out there trying to do that.
Sure.
That are huge. This is the biggest church we have in our denomination. And that's just not the norm at all.
Bubba has an interesting comment here. He said, that's when the prosperity gospel took over. Once people like Graham remembered where his bread got buttered and took the seat they did during the civil rights movement. Once they sold out one moral, it was over. Right.
I think it was interesting. She made a comment about that he felt he had to preach the Christian message, or his version of a Christian message. I was sitting there going, no, he was selling out because of his political message. He was selling out because it was politically advantageous for him, because, as Bubba's saying, his bread was buttered on the side of people that did not support.
In his case, money talks, bullshit walks, right? I mean, so
right. He chose a path.
Yeah, as Bubba says, he's taken his seat. When he bailed on Martin Luther King and that movement, he took his seat, and that's what. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, the time when I really, all that other stuff I was talking about him, about some of the things he wrote to people's newspaper articles and stuff like that I read occasionally. I wasn't an avid newspaper reader. See that page. The thing that had me lose any sense of real respect for him was when Mitt Romney was running for president.
Mm.
Billy Graham had on a website, and he's an old man at this point. He was well into his 80s at this point. He had a website, and on the website, it listed denominations and called them sectarians or cults, or he had this definition.
So he said
something.
He had something to say about Mormonism.
Because Mitt Romney was Mormon and running for president, In order for him to endorse him, he had to change his stance on the Mormon Church. Now, if he had gone down some road another time and said, I've researched this denomination and I understand differently and whatever else, that's why I'm making this change. It wasn't that. It was because it was advantageous politically. Mitt Romney elected.
Okay. All right.
So that's what I mean. It was more about the politics.
I always, as an atheist that has now pushed it away, and once you push it away, you can kind of you get a more, I guess maybe you get this from seminary as well, right? Where you get a bigger picture and you see all the infighting, and then it's with Mormons and Catholics, the way I do it is the right way. We always like to talk about Mormons and their magic underwear, but
that's right.
But that's their ritual, right? It's not like I went to a Catholic church one time with my buddy David Johnson, and man, they were walking in the door, splashing water on their face. It was it might as well have been a Pilates and a core class from all the kneeling and the bowing, and just the sheer amount of it was a spectacle, right? Like the Catholic Church likes a little bit of this spectacle, and they have some weirdo stuff too. And it's just, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's Baptist and Methodist too. Like Methodist, now your strain is a little more, hey, this is a book that we don't necessarily take all of it literally, right? But like you get these large congregations in these churches. I think that they're lost on what they should take literally and what they shouldn't. But I'm just saying, I just find it funny that Billy Graham would have anything to say about a church having a weird belief, because all churches have weird beliefs. All religions have weird beliefs.
Yeah, Bubba says he remembers talk of dangers of a Catholic when Kerry ran years before. But they also had those same complaints, concerns when John F. Kennedy ran, that he was like in there. There's a lot of, especially among conservative Christians, there's a lot of conservative Protestants, I should say.
Yeah,
there's a lot of. I'm afraid of Catholic as they do stuff we don't understand.
Yeah.
They pray to Mary, which they don't do. Things like that.
Yeah. So look, I do it differently, so my way is the way, right? But it's all like,
that's right.
To me, it's like, okay, well, you're all doing weird things, So I always find it funny when one religious group's like, well, those people are crazy,
That's right. Yeah, well, I get that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on.
Segment that America was experiencing a threat, and whether or not that threat was real, a lot of people were afraid, and the government had done a really good job of instilling this atheistic communist fear within the hearts and minds of American people. Here you have preachers like Billy Graham coming in. They are affirming these fears, and they are providing a solution. They're saying, we are in danger and there is a solution. It's Jesus. And you just got to get on your knees. You got to pray. You got to accept Jesus, live like a Christian, and all of this will go away. And so we can see how it was very easy for people to kind of cling to this hope, to cling to the salvation that this ideology offered from the fear of communism, the fear of atheism. The American people were primed for the rise of the religious right, which brings us to Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell was an American Baptist pastor, televangelist.
So much fun about all the Falwells.
And conservative activist. He was founding pastor of the Thomas Road Baptist Church, which was a megachurch in Lynchburg, Virginia. He founded Lynchburg Christian Academy in 1967 and founded Liberty University in 1971. He also co-founded The Moral Majority. Now, I found a senior thesis by Catherine Legg. This is on the Liberty University Digital Library website. And so I thought it would be fair to share directly from the source, Liberty University. Now, according to the thesis, Falwell expressed in his biography that he was raised in the segregated South and his father was a local businessman who supported segregation in business, but was very friendly and civil with fellow Black residents.
Okay. I hate the way this is written, right, is just a straight whitewash as in general, right? I mean, he was friendly, but let me just say I would prefer to not deny your rights. Like that's not friendly.
That's not friendly.
That's not friendly.
Of his time. In 1956, at only 22 years old, he founded Thomas Road Baptist Church. He said that while he allowed Black attendees, they could not access church membership. He said they would not think to join and we would not think to ask them. And I think it's so important to recognize.
He said that in 1997. he said that out loud in something he wrote, according to that, in 1997.
Yeah.
I'm not racist. I have a Black friend. Yes.
Yeah.
I just love the rationale there. You have the gymnastics you have to play to say, oh, I love all people, but I don't want them to be a member of the church.
Do you feel
they
like
can come, but they can't have status?
Yeah. Do you feel like Jerry Falwell is a type of person that has done damage to what you do? Like he made it harder.
Oh, huge.
Okay.
Because of people like Jerry Falwell and the majority, they not only preach this particular brand of Christianity, they also convinced a lot of people who were either following them for political reasons or because because of abortion, mostly, or because they believed in the fundamentalist theology. That if you spoke anything other than what he said, you were not Christian, you were evil. And I think Falwell did damage to pastors and churches and the Christian message immensely. The other one would be Pat Robertson, Jimmy Swagger.
Osteria, welcome back from last week. We got is it Finland or Norway or Denmark? Anyway, so Osteria's back.
Ask him about football.
You're right. Finland. I agree. It's great that different churches still speak their different thing. Me, atheist, I don't care. I don't care what do your thing. Just don't infringe on other folk and try to make that the law of the land. You know what I mean? I would think that that's the way to be, is just like, hey, you do your thing, I do my thing. It's a personal thing. You can have groups of people that come together and do your personal thing together because you're having a common place with these folks. But, once you start stretching out into this is the way everybody should be,
Yeah, Copeland as well. Stereo, interesting that you mentioned the Irish dilemma. When I was the youth director at Luke's church back in the late 80s, there was an organization that I think still around, the Ulster Project, and they brought kids from Ireland who were Protestant and Catholic. They brought an equal number, and they brought them to America to do things together so that they could learn that these people are not the enemy.
Not enemies.
They're just people who practice differently too. And it was a really interesting project, and something that is a kind of project that could have happened in Oak Ridge, but might not have happened in a lot of other parts of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Oak Ridge is an interesting little town, though. Just little bitty melting pot in a lot of ways.
Cognitive dissonance that it takes, that you have to exist.
Also, the place where we created a very bad
Christian
weapon,
pastor,
the bomb.
Getting on a pulpit,
right,
preaching from the Bible, which has a lot of ideas in it, but it definitely says in there you got to love your neighbor and be kind, and love is the fulfillment of the law, while actively denying membership to people because of their race. It says, besides the sermons Falwell preached on segregation, he was also the chaplain of the Lynchburg chapter of the Defenders of State Sovereignty and Individual Liberty, which was a state organization that supported segregation and the massive resistance policy. He also publicly stated that he questioned the sincerity of Martin Luther King Jr. and believed his movement was the result of left-wing communist ideologies. In the early 1960s, Falwell helped distribute anti-Martin Luther King Jr. literature furnished by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. In 1958, 4 years after Brown versus Board of Education, Falwell preached a sermon entitled Segregation or Integration, which he stated that chaos resulted from the Brown ruling, and we have left God out of decisions altogether.
It's chaos, I tell you.
So because it was hard, it was wrong? Is that what he's saying?
Right. What we should do is we should blame integration for the NIL and what it's doing to the Tennessee football program.
College sports.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those of you that are not from the Tennessee area, that means the quarterback for the college University of Tennessee decided that, he's worth more money.
Yeah, he's not worth more money.
He's not.
Yeah.
He's not, but he thinks he is.
Yeah.
Justice Warren and his associates had known God's word and had desired to do the Lord's will. I am quite confident that the 1954 decision would never have been made. Finally, we see the devil himself behind it. What will integration of the races do to us? It will destroy our race.
This is the worst kind of manipulation, too.
I can't tell you how many times I have had people tell me that racism is not Christian and that racism is directly from Satan and that Satan encourages people to be hateful, not Christianity. But here we have,
it's not Christian.
In the 1960s, a Baptist preacher claiming that integration was from the devil. He genuinely believed it was God's will to keep people segregated. And I think that's really important that we remember that it wasn't just a thing that America was doing and the Christians opposed it. No, the Christians were supporting it. Not all Christians, but the Baptists, Southern Christians, a lot of Christians were supporting segregation and they believed that it was evil.
So one of the scriptural references to support segregation had to do with when the Israelites had made it to the promised land and they were going from this place to that place and they got exiled, and in the exile they lived in these other places, and there was a lot of integration of folks that were Jewish and non-Jewish, and there was this belief that you had to keep yourself pure or whatever, and it's about that still sounds racist to me. But it's again about the idea
to integrate.
Whoops, maybe not racist. I didn't mean to hit that, but maybe not racist. But there's some kind of bigotry here, right? Because I mean, like, they're going to look very similar.
And yeah, exactly. And racism, the idea, the concept of race, that's a medieval concept.
Sure, it came around later.
Yeah, and when the Bible talks about nation, it doesn't mean the border. We keep hearing from some orange person that you don't have a country if you don't have borders. Mm-hmm. That's not what nation they were kind of talking about. Remember that the nation Israel was not a nation with borders at the time. It just wasn't. So it was a culture.
I mean,
people?
I'm sure that a lot of countries had borders, but I mean, it's
sure. I'm sure they did, but
how do you police them back then, let alone even today? In a lot of ways, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, we moving on.
Yes.
Races. Because of his strong support of segregation, he founded the Liberty Christian Academy in 1967. Liberty Christian Academy is a private Christian school in Lynchburg, Virginia, founded in 1967 by Baptist preacher Jerry Falwell as a ministry of Thomas Road Baptist Church and a segregation academy. Segregation academies were founded after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, where the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to separate children by their race in public schools. And so they got rid of segregation in public schools, and immediately these segregation academies, as they were called, started popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
And these were private Christian run schools that were segregated because Christians wanted to maintain segregation. And so they had to find a way to make sure that their children weren't going to schools where they might mix with other races. Now, because these were religious organizations and they were private Christian schools, they received tax exempt status.
You're about to say?
So that's to me one of the big pushes why you see the right in American politics fighting for the idea of taking away the Board of Education, and because the
Department of Education.
Department of Education, the Department of Education has the responsibility to care for all people.
Yep.
And so it supports programs that go into every kind of community.
That's DEI. Oh my gosh.
That's and then you have the people like the legislature of Tennessee who said, hey, you know what? If you want to send your kid to a private school, that's okay. We'll pay for it. We'll give you money. That's not only separating the wealthiest folks and giving them a tax break and giving them, paying their kids to school. It is also about segregation because private schools don't have the same requirements. Yeah, they don't have the same requirements to allow to be required to allow all students, and so they can pick and choose. And that, of course, they'll pick, if it's a predominantly white school, they're going to predict white kids, and they're going to come in, and it's about race there. But if that basketball player, that football player, or that whatever, we'll bring them in, because we want to make sure that I know you were recruited like crazy, right?
Oh yeah, totally like crazy.
6'2" center.
Yes, that's right. In shoes, 6'2" in shoes.
6'2" in shoes.
But yes, they will definitely make exceptions when it suits them.
So they could make all the money they wanted to.
So they can make all the money they want.
Maintain segregation, and they never had to pay taxes on that because they were technically like a church. But in 1970, the IRS announced that they were going to be removing the tax exempt status from these segregation academies, and that in order to maintain their tax exempt status, they had to integrate their schools. There's a lot building in the evangelical communities over this because they really saw this as an overreach, government overreach into their, their religion.
Again, this is also before the Southern strategy, and I believe this is at a time when the Democrat Party was probably like trying to figure out what it even is at this point. Like they're moving.
Yeah,
they're moving to the middle. They're moving to the middle to the point where one of the reasons why, from what I understand, the Southern strategy ended up happening is because the parties became too much the same in a lot of ways. So
yeah, I could accept that.
Real quickly, Carla, I don't think that I knew that a lot of Oak Ridge scientists had committed suicide after they found out the thing they were working on is the bomb. Does it shock me when you hear that? No, not at all, because I mean, just
especially after the bomb was dropped.
Let alone after the bombs were dropped, and there's some conflicting stories on whether it was necessary, right?
There isn't much conflict on the second one. It was not necessary.
Right. The second one definitely not. The first one, I still think that you could probably find plenty of.
I'm saying that one's still conflicting. There are people that think both ways on that one.
Right. But when you look at the sheer damage that was done, right, and war,
not necessary.
Well, I mean,
yeah, I agree.
War is hell, and I'm certainly not making an exception for, wartime. I think it's all bad. But that, it was beyond. I think it was a terrorist attack. Basically, it has all the you hit a bomb that big.
We're going to show you our
show you our
we're going
power.
to
You
show
better
you
sit
our
down.
strength.
And we're doing it by just completely destroying your society in this city and in that city. And when I say society, I mean
Indiscriminate.
Yeah, I mean, it's civilians, right? We're making no exception for women and children. We're hitting a city. This is not a precision strike to a military target. This is by the definitions that we we consider terrorism. That's terrorism. Now it's terrorism with the biggest stick you've ever seen, But
it was intended to terrorize.
Yeah, we'll get back on topic to put a little bow on this. I didn't know that after, it does not surprise me, Carla. It's the whole. I'm of the opinion I'm a proud Oak Ridger, but I'm not like proud of the atomic bomb. And my father worked for Y-12 my entire life and still up to this day has involvements. So, all right, let's move on. Let's stick with the back to Christian nationalism.
Just schools. This was a violation of religious freedom. And to put this into context, in 1962, the Supreme Court agreed that school-led prayer violated the First Amendment. And so they removed prayer from the schools, as a lot of Christians like to say. And I remember growing up as a kid and being told by my grandparent that, everything went to hell when they removed prayer from schools. And I remember thinking that they made it illegal for prayer to be in schools or for you to pray. And it actually wasn't until I think I became an adult that I realized that that was not the case. They took prayer out of schools. They removed God from the classroom, when what they really did was decide that we couldn't favor a specific religion in the classroom. It wasn't fair. It wasn't constitutional. And so we were no longer allowed to use the school to lead prayers. A teacher couldn't lead a Christian prayer in front of the class. It is not an attack on your religious freedom to say that in a public tax-funded classroom, a teacher can't favor a specific religion. But because this is what was going on at the time, you have prayer being removed from schools, and now you have these Christian segregation academies that are losing their tax-exempt status. And so people like Jerry Falwell were angry. They felt like there was this serious attack. And I think that paired with the fears that had already fueled all of this leading up in the Cold War about this atheistic communism, this decline of morality. And then you have the schools removing prayer to the evangelical Christian. This just looked like a domino effect. It was a slippery slope and it was happening really fast. Even though the IRS announced this removal of tax-exempt status in segregation academies, it was a long battle to actually implement this new rule. And so there were years of just battling between these segregation academies and the IRS, and Jerry Falwell was at the center of all of it. And he really started kind of mobilizing Christians for his cause and talking about this government overreach and getting people really fired up about the violation of religious freedom in America. And although Falwell was gaining popularity when it came to segregation, he was fighting a losing battle. Times were changing, social attitudes about race were progressing, and the majority of Americans didn't support segregation, so he couldn't rally enough support behind his cause. And I actually wrote back here on my Try Erase board that through 1970 to 1980, Jerry Falwell was really pissed and nobody really cared. But that's not actually true, because he actually ran a television and radio show from his church starting in 1956 called Old Time Gospel Hour. And this program was very popular and lucrative. And it's reported that by the early 80s, it was bringing in over $90 million.
Jesus.
$90 million.
In 1980.
So
I mean,
Falwell had good reason to stay relevant, okay? When all of this was going on, he's like fighting against the IRS.
University. The Falwells are exceptionally rich people, and
Yes.
you know, when you're talking about the children, you know, they've got some interesting things that
And,
happen in their life, and but their power is immense. You might even say the 2016 election was handed to Donald Trump because of the Falwells.
oh, yes. I think that was a big part. But, I assume where she's about to get to is 1972, because Jerry Falwell, the moral majority, didn't just start in 1979. It started, it may have been established in 1979, but it was started in 1972.
Okay.
Roe v.
Uh,
Wade,
yeah, Roe v. Wade. Okay.
because he'd lost his leverage with segregation.
Yes,
He needed to find a new
a new
stress
focal
point.
point. Yeah, that's true. Osteria, I don't necessarily disagree with the maybe, but I mean it was 214,000 people killed in 2 days. I guess
The other part of that, is that there was a lot already on the table in the sense of ceasefires getting ready to
right.
be signed.
That was the thing, is that, you know, Germany had already been defeated.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Japan was about to surrender already.
Yeah, so
The
and
need
then
for the bomb.
there's questions on whether there's a need for the bomb, and I understand that there's people that, fall both ways on that. Just moving back
And
to
some people are the same person. But yeah.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
I think that the Roe v. Wade uh, abortion case
It was definitely a
solidified the moral majority.
sure. It became a unifying task, I
It,
guess.
it was their one. It was their
Yeah,
one thing to vote
thing to fight against. Yeah.
Defending
on. And
segregation,
it
but America is just trying to move on. He needed to cling to relevance. And we're going to get to that. But I want to talk for a minute about what was going on at the same time that Jerry was fighting with the IRS. The Supreme Court ruled in 1973
There you
that the
go, Bill.
Constitution protected a woman's right to an abortion, Roe v. Wade.
Oops, I
Now,
was
this
wrong on
case
the
was
year.
recently overturned, but in a Gallup poll from August 1972, just months before Roe v. Wade, found that 64% of Americans, including a majority of Roman Catholics, believed that the decision to have an abortion should be left solely to the woman and her doctor. Abortion was primarily seen as a Catholic issue, and evangelical Christians were not as heavily involved in the debate. In fact, the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest evangelical denomination in the U.S., supported abortion rights in certain cases, including rape, incest, and when the life of the mother was at risk. W.A. Criswell, the Southern Baptist Convention's former president, said, "I have always felt that it was only after a child was born and had a life separate from its mother that it became an individual person, and it has always therefore seemed to me that what is best for the mother and for the future should be allowed." 3 years before Roe v. Wade in 1971, a spokesperson for the Southern Baptist Convention said, "We call upon Southern Baptists to work for legislation that will allow the possibility of an abortion under such conditions as rape, incest, clear evidence of severe fetal deformity, and carefully ascertained evidence of the likelihood of damage to the emotional, mental, and physical health of the
Times
mother."
have changed
And so if a
now.
woman's pregnancy is detrimental to her mental health, then the Southern Baptists were supporting her right to get an abortion. So this is what's going on at the time that Jerry Falwell's losing his tax-exempt status. But it seemed like he wasn't really concerned with this at all. And in fact, it wasn't until 5 years after Roe v. Wade that Falwell preached his first sermon against abortion, framing it as a moral issue. It's almost as if he couldn't get enough support for his desire to remain segregated, but he needed to continue to
Just as you
convince
said.
American people that we still had a moral issue. And so he found a new cause to get behind, and that was abortion. And this was how he met Paul Weyrich. Paul Weyrich was an American conservative political activist and commentator associated with the New Right. He co-founded the Heritage Foundation. We'll talk about that one later. He coined the term moral majority. Interestingly enough, this is just a fun little side quest here. Paul Weyrich started the Heritage Foundation with the help of Joseph Coors of Coors Brewing Company.
Mhm.
Joseph Coors gave him $250,000 to start up the Heritage Foundation, and then $300,000 a year after that to support it. What's really interesting about that is that through the 60s and 70s, Coors was accused of discriminatory practices. And because of this discrimination, a lot of Hispanic people, Black people, women, LGBTQ activists, they were kind of pushing for this boycott of Coors. And so I think Joseph Coors had a little bit of a grudge. And coincidentally, the same demographics of people that were boycotting Coors in the 70s are the same demographics of people that are most targeted in Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 mandate. Oh, and also another one of those groups that kind of rallied against Coors and boycotted them were workers' rights groups, labor unions, which the Heritage Foundation and conservative evangelicals really don't like. So I just, let's.
So, are we just saying, is it just what it is now? Like, how they were like, I don't know what Project 2025 is. What is this? And now like they're doing it and more.
Yeah. So I was it's interesting that she made that connection, because I didn't know that connection. The beginnings of Heritage Foundation with Coors.
I didn't know about Coors either. Yeah.
Yeah, that was news to me. But that doesn't mean it's not true, because I didn't really know Heritage Foundation, because they were more secretive about things. They were just trying to get judges elected.
Sure.
Not judges elected, chosen. So DT, the orange one, when he was elected the first time, when he chose his Supreme Court justices, he got the list from the Heritage Foundation.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, he acts like he has nothing to do with them.
Yeah, exactly. But, the other thing about the other thing I think that has to do with the moral majority did to damage the gospel message, the Christian message, is because they got so obsessed with this one issue about abortion and rallied around that so much that they pigeonholed themselves into a place of, we've got to support candidates who support that. And so you had the Christian Coalition that was putting out these flyers and surveys that they had interviewed candidates and asked them about all these questions, which were eventually what got them to lose their tax status, because they were biased political questions. And what they were doing was saying, if your candidate is voting for, if your candidate doesn't support the end of Roe v. Wade and doing everything they can to limit the access to abortion, then your candidate isn't our candidate. Well, the Republican Party is not stupid. They said, look, we got all these people out here that are going to rally behind us. We can do whatever we want with the economy. They'll be okay with it. So then suddenly you have things accepting this idea that, that idea of self-sustaining and all that's important.
Well, sure. And she's been saying, the other thing you mentioned, whatever we can do with the economy, right? There's another aspect to this, as she mentioned earlier in the video, that Christianity is put at odds with communism, right? So it's like that.
Yes.
So if we're doing the math on that, that means capitalism, which is considered the opposite of, is Christian, right?
Yeah. And because they equated communism with authoritarianism in that context. Now authoritarianism is a big difference. But they had this idea. The Christians were just the evangelical Christians were just so enamored with the abortion issue that they didn't know that unions might have helped them. They didn't know that taking away the safety net,
right,
for example.
And this is where you get people voting against their interests.
They're voting against their interest, and they're voting against their neighbors' interest, because we want to get homeless people off the street. Well, let's make sure we take away any opportunity they have to get help.
All right. We are really behind. It looks like
Let's little
we might have to cut it off in a little bit and get back to it in the next episode.
just sit in there and we can make the connections on our own. So with the help of Joseph Coors, Paul Weyrich co-founded the Heritage Foundation, and it went on to become one of the most influential political organizations in the United States. They have successfully worked to influence even the upcoming Trump administration and its policies. In a 1995 interview, this is really interesting, Weyrich, whatever his name is, acknowledged that he learned how to organize from liberals.
Liberals learned how to organize. They learned how to frame issues. They learned how to seize the moral high ground. They learned how to integrate the work of think tanks and politics inside the United States Congress with political action on the outside and so on. And all of this they did very, very well.
I think that this is a huge lesson to those who are on the left today who are really looking for a way to gain a voice, to regain a voice in the political climate, because it's very much leaning one way at this point. And throughout history, I think this is what happens, like the pendulum swings, right? And so right now, the right is kind of rising up and the left has lost its voice. And we've gotten very tired and very afraid and frustrated, and it is created a kind of apathy. If we look at how these organizations rise up, how they influence culture and the minds of people, it's so interesting to see how we've all just borrowed from one another each time, and how even Weyrich is saying that he saw the way the left got together and mobilized and grew in numbers. And he took from that and he emulated that. He mirrored it and created one of the most influential political organizations today. He is a Catholic conservative. He has his own ideas about how to run a country. He had the financial support of someone who was very anti-progress, anti-labor union, anti-Black, anti-Hispanic, anti-gay. And alongside other political activists at the time, they formed an organization that would mirror strategies used by the very groups they despised to fight back against them. And here is a really interesting and kind of scary video of Paul explaining that his goal isn't to fight for policies that benefit the majority of Americans, but that he can only accomplish his goals if the majority of Americans don't actually vote.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
That is not someone who seeks for a better America for all people. That is someone who has decided that his way is the only way, and he's going to stop at nothing to accomplish it. He once wrote in the 70s, "The new political philosophy must be defined by us in moral terms, packaged in non-religious language, and propagated throughout the country by our new coalition. When political power is achieved, the moral majority will have the opportunity to recreate this great nation." And
So, I mean, that's, that this is what they're saying then.
And now.
And now you get Trump winning, the 2024 election, and included in that was it was a plurality. It wasn't a majority, but won the popular vote for the first time. And because of this, now it's like, okay, we have the mandate, and, they're implementing it now. So, like, this was very prophetic. Yeah. Carlos said Fall was playing the long game. I don't think maybe he knew how long, but yeah, and they definitely created the one issue voter for sure.
He first attempted to partner with.
So what you were saying though about this, sorry, I got distracted by Carlos there. I think the direction of where we are right now is very much the idea that they're going to recreate America in what they once thought it was. And that includes segregation. It includes doing away with the ability for people to marry who they want, not just heterosexual, but also racial differences. which is absurd because now more than ever, we probably have more kids who have multiple races
Sure.
easily identifiable in their history. So if you define, then we're going to get back into, well, if there's a blood, that kind of.
Oh yeah.
So
We do not want the word quadroon re-implemented into society. Sometimes it makes us feel like that they're wanting to head back that way, right? So we have. I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but maybe I don't know. It seems like we're rolling back a lot of stuff.
Organization called Christian Voice. It was headquartered at the Heritage Foundation in the 70s and 80s and is currently located in Alexandria, Virginia. Paul had a kind of falling out with the leader of Christian Voice, and so he decided to switch directions and find another evangelical leader that could help him accomplish what he was trying to accomplish. And this is when he met Jerry Falwell. And together they brought on other Christian leaders like Tim LaHaye and Pat Robertson and put their heads together about how to get more Christian votes for politicians who held their same values. Reagan's rhetoric about restoring America's moral foundation, limiting government interference, building up the military, this all resonated with America.
This is huge influence right here.
That's right.
I mean, absolutely monstrous. And just and
the on is finding his own group, these same kind of folks.
Yeah. So and Reagan, gosh, how he got to the Falwell place, I mean, is a story in itself, right? Because I mean, we're talking about a California Republican, right?
Yeah, that's right.
America, a Christian America that was very afraid of these foreign threats of atheistic communism. He would really help kind of instill this morality that we needed to fight against evil forces. Their goal really was to make America great again. The moral majority grew quickly because they utilized the mailing list from Jerry Falwell's old-time gospel hour. So this political group that they formed went into the mailing list for his Christian television show, and they took that mailing list and used it to get support behind their moral majority cause. With a membership of millions, the Moral Majority became one of the largest conservative lobby groups in the United States. At its height, it claimed more than 4 million members and over 2 million donors. Some of the issues for which Moral Majority campaigned included traditional family values, opposition to media outlets accused of promoting an anti-family agenda, opposition to equal rights, opposition to state recognition or acceptance of homosexual acts, prohibition of abortion, including in cases involving incest or rape. It's a very long leap from where the Southern Baptists stood around Roe v. Wade. Support for Christian prayer in schools and proselytizing to Jews and other non-Christians for conversion to Christianity. The Moral Majority portrayed issues such as abortion, divorce, feminism, gay and lesbian rights, and the Equal Rights Amendment as attacks on the traditional concept and values of American families, and tapped into a sense of societal moral decay that resonated with many evangelicals. They were primed for this. In particular, the anti-homosexual rhetoric that they publicized through fundraising letters and Christian broadcasting had higher contribution rates than other topics. So they made more money talking about it.
When you can hate somebody.
Moral Majority commentator Charlie Judd, who argued that there are absolutes in this world, just as jumping off a building will kill a person, so will the spread of homosexuality bring about the demise of American culture as we know it.
And it worked in the 2024 election because
it worked,
the ads that they had where we don't want them boys playing sports with our girls, and the NCAA guy said 100 and something thousand, we have less than one handful of trans women playing sports.
So Dara,
and I agree with you about boys.
I've watched like the first 15 minutes of The Boys. Me and Jess have talked about watching it, but we never get around to doing it. The Handmaid's Tale, we're completely caught up. And yeah, I agree with the comment. The Handmaid's Tale feels like where we're going, and The Boys. I mean, minus the actual superheroes or super
Yeah.
villains portrayed as heroes. Um,
I,
I,
I got to the place where we there was a season where it just got too dark and I just quit watching
um,
The
I
Boys.
I did read an article about The Boys where there were a bunch of conservatives within them. I think that the writing of The Boys it's trying less and less to cover up, what they're protesting against, the art that they're making. And a bunch of conservatives found out that, oh, these characters are actually fascists. And they're like, oh, and it just changed their opinion. Like, they got real butthurt about it. It was one of the funnier
Yeah,
articles
oddly,
I
that's
read
about
about
when
it.
I stopped watching it too, but it just because it was so spot on and so just so dark that I didn't need that in my life at the time.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as, like, the very first scene, I believe it's like it tells you all you need to know about the superheroes causing more harm than good. Because I mean, I think he's holding his girlfriend or whatever, the very first scene, and then like this super speedy like, the Flash or whatever runs by and he's drunk or something like that, and like just completely, I guess he's holding her
They were
arms,
not
like,
the
yeah,
they
yeah,
were not the moral, yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah, the main character's girlfriend was run through by the fast guy,
yeah,
and that brought him on board. But yeah, there was a couple of, I don't remember what season it was, but it ended and it was like blatant at that point. There was Nazism
hmm
uh, and fascism that was very blatant with the new character that had come on, and it was powerful. I'm not arguing with that at all. It just was. We were in the middle of a pandemic and all that, and it was just I had too much else. I didn't need that much
yeah.
darkness in me.
And then, you have to do that whole pastor thing too. So
I had to be alive. I had to not be so
right,
depressed that I could.
yeah,
There had to be hope. There had to be hope in the world,
some hope somewhere.
and yeah.
The moral majority didn't really last that long. They lasted about a decade. It says by the end of Ronald Reagan's presidential administration, Christian right organizations were generally in a phase of decline. Donations were decreasing because after 8 years of Christian right supported leadership, the nation was no longer seen as in the same state of supposed moral peril as it was when Reagan first took office. Christians, they mobilized, they worked together, they elected Reagan. They thought everything was getting better, and they felt as though they could be comfortable. They accomplished their mission. Disbanding the moral majority in 1989, Falwell declared, "Our goal has been achieved. The religious right is solidly in place. Religious conservatives in America are now in for the duration." But the pendulum always swings. The moral majority really became a kind of punching bag for leftist culture, and they were perceived correctly as being very intolerant, very hateful, overzealous, out of touch. And so they kind of became this, again, this punching bag for comedians and media.
I'm mad. I'm upset with the moral majority, man. How can y'all sit there in your living rooms and say that it's too much sex, drugs, and violence on TV? It ain't enough.
And I think this also kind of led to the erosion of the image of the moral majority and, a lot of the public perception of them. But I want to point out something just kind of from my own experience, having been raised in fundamentalist Christianity, is that within these groups, they have a very, very strong indoctrinated persecution complex. And so when you target a group of evangelical Christians,
This is their defining characteristic, is that they're persecuted, in my opinion.
I think you're right. I think that's a really brilliant concept she's created there, because the the war on Christmas.
Yeah, the war on Christmas is
It made up thing.
Starbucks. They
Oh,
changed the
the red
cup a
cup.
little bit. Yeah,
It wasn't specifically Christian. It never was.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea that the teller, the corporation who wants everybody's business was somehow against anti-Christian because they said Happy Holidays
Right.
instead of Merry Christmas. I'm like, you know what? I don't know what you are, and just because you wear some cross on your chest or whatever doesn't mean I think you're Christian.
But holidays is like, I mean, like, if you're one of those people who gets mad at somebody saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas,
that's just ridiculously.
That's super on you, because I mean, like, it's not like when we say Happy Holidays, yeah, sure, there's like, Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and as well as Christmas, and then there's the New Year, right? And then before that we got Thanksgiving, and then like if you want to be like me, we throw it in Halloween, during this time, right? So like it's like
That's right.
We call it the holiday season, and it's just
That's
like
right. Exactly.
When you say Happy Holidays, you're saying like the most accurate thing that could be said, right? In particular, now, the people that get mad about it is not saying Merry Christmas are folks that are just like, I want you to recognize my Christianity.
No. It's more than that.
Okay, what is it?
I want you to be my Christianity.
Well, that too.
Not only do you have to recognize it,
right,
you have to bow to it.
But I'm just saying, like, like, don't say holidays because the other holidays insult me.
And because you might also be, if say Happy Holidays, you might, because Ramadan sometimes falls around that time.
Mm-hmm.
You might also be recognizing Jews. You might be recognizing Islam. You might be recognizing some other holiday that is some other religion, and that offends me, is what they're saying. And that, and then they want to turn around and call liberals snowflakes.
The Happy Holidays is the most friendly way to greet somebody in this kind of way at that time. I mean, if
yes.
we're,
but that's because it's inclusive.
Right. But inclusivity is bad, Billy.
I know. It's just a terrible thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was the whole point of the Christian church, was to include people. Go into the world and make disciples of all nations, for the transformation of the world. The whole concept of the church was, how do we include more people?
Right. And this is not that.
And you make fun of them, and you insult them, and you put them down. All this does, and I'm saying this from experience, all this does is fuel them. This lights the fire beneath them. In 2 Timothy 3:1-5, it says, mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. And it goes on to list all of the terrible things. People will be proud and boastful, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, have nothing to do with such people. And then in verse 12, it says, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will be persecuted. It is a sign from God that they are on the right path and doing the right thing. I used to write this in my journal. I used to write about, the people that made.
Let me say something. So I noticed there she's quoting from the New International Version, which is the evangelical bias translation, and that took over the King James as the most popular Bible. And it is they made choices in how to translate that lead people to this more fundamentalist view of those things. I would, if my the way my program, I have a 2-screen phone. If I go to that text, I would have a hard time getting back to this chat. So long story, but that translation that talks about that persecution and some of that stuff is pretty biased.
Yeah. So what? Okay.
Yes.
This might be the last thing we talk about tonight then. So, that you consider that translation bias?
Yes.
Well, what is the other translation that would be less bias? Like, how would you read it?
So I use the New Revised Standard Version, and there is an updated edition as of this year.
The new Revised Standard Version.
The new revised, and part of the reason it worked hard to avoid bias. And let's be clear, nothing can ever get rid of bias.
Okay.
One of the things that they did was it is a vast group of people that worked on it from different areas, from different denominations, from different scholars around the world.
So
this is
the
new Revised Standard,
right? The editing of the Council of Nicaea's work.
Well, it's the translation,
yeah,
not the editing. No,
I'm messing.
Yeah, not.
I'm messing around,
yeah.
Billy.
So you know, if you read the King James preface back when they wrote it, which is not included in King James Bibles today, they said when they translated the King James, this needs to be updated every 20 years. And it has been updated over years. You and I couldn't read the King James in the original King James.
Oh, no.
So
Shakespeare was hard
the
enough.
New Revised, that's right. The New Revised Standard Version is one is published in 1989, and they did a lot of work that these scholars did. What is the phrase in science when somebody peer-reviewed stuff?
Mm-hmm.
They translated it, and they had other people critique their translation. And then they had other.
This was a group effort. This was a massive
huge
effort for a lot of people.
Group. Yeah, and many denominations were involved. The new international version was a very small group of people that got together to translate the Bible to enforce their fundamentalist and conservative views of things. It became very popular because it was the first. At least that I know of, first translation, not a paraphrase, that was done that was easy to read.
Mm-hmm.
And it did a good job of writing to a sixth grade education level. And the New Standard was less concerned with writing to a sixth grade level. They were more concerned about trying to get it accurate. And also we had even more access to some of the more ancient documents that the Dead Sea Scrolls are still being worked through.
Right.
So they had more resources. Yeah, they had more resources to. But even the New Revised Standard, New International Version, by the way, has been updated 6 or 7 times. Because I went to online, I've told the Christmas story from the New International Version because it's what I had when I it to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I went back, some 30 years later, I went back and said, I really need to brush up on that, make sure I get it right again. And so I pulled up the New International Version on a computer, and I went, oh, this is not how I remember it. And then I pulled up the Bible, the physical Bible from. Well, that's not the same. And I did a little research, and it had changed about 7 times. And the people it was ticking off every time they changed it were those private schools using the International Version, because now they had to redo all their Sunday school, they had redo all their literature, and then they had to pay royalties on it. So the New Revised Standard is the one I stand by. The updated edition, I'm told by a few people that know things, that probably is even better. I don't know that for sure. My access to it has been kind of limited at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a Hebrew scholar or a Greek scholar to rely on those that are.
Sure.
And trust that they're trying to do their best to be honest about it.
Good faith. They're in good faith, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ed says it's odd that such a perfect book could be misinterpreted, and we've talked a little bit about the Gnostic Gospels, but yeah.
To answer that, best I can answer that, I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at. You're talking about Gospel of Thomas and some of those others that are out there. Is that what you mean? I'm going to assume that until you respond differently. that uh, a lot of those are really just sayings books. They're not really narratives. Um, my my background in kind of understanding things is storytelling. So I'm more drawn to the Gospel of Luke, for instance, because the stories are there. I'll tell you a little quick thing on this. I was speaking in a few weeks ago. Um, I was speaking a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that we were talking about the parable of the loving father or the two brothers or the prodigal son, and I said this is not a real story. This is a parable that Jesus told. It's a story he made up. And we were at lunch with folks from the church, and a guy said, "By the way, what do you mean they're not true stories?" I went, "Well, they never were. Nobody's ever said they were." I'm like, where did he get this idea that these parables were true, factual stories, or that they were ever intended to be believed to be that? And I don't know where that came. It was stunned me.
So you
But
think in this, you're saying this specifically to what Jesus was saying,
Jesus told this story,
right?
and
So
it wasn't a factual story.
this would be like Jesus telling an Aesop tale.
Yeah, exactly. They're
Yeah.
parables. They're a story that's laid beside another story to
Right.
illuminate the other story. That other story may be lives. It may be something else. But yeah, a parable is never like you said, a fable being told to illustrate a point. The parable, the Good Samaritan. Guy gets beat up, priest comes by, Levite comes by, they walk on by, and the Samaritan comes, who was the evil, the Samaritan was the enemy, and he helps the man. That's an illustration of what God's love looks like. You know, um, so to answer the Gnostic Gospels thing, I agree with your statement. I haven't read Peter. I've read a little bit of Thomas. Um, I've seen some stuff, documentaries, I think, so to speak, on the Gospel of Judas, and the concept of that is very interesting. Because it's the idea that Judas, who's the one that betrayed Jesus and sold, that maybe he was actually the hero of the story, that he actually just was trying to push things along. Though there's some translation things that some people think differently about that. For instance, that maybe there's a particular thing that's hard to read in the text they have because they're ancient, and that maybe it could be translated this way, and that changes the whole thing. But it's an interesting thing to talk about if you know more about it. It is interesting what I've heard about them. Interesting. I do think Thomas gets a bad rap by being called Doubting Thomas.
Doubting Thomas.
Yeah,
I didn't know it was
because
called Doubting
he
Thomas.
said, "You've never phrased." Yeah, Thomas was called Doubting Thomas because when Jesus showed his hand, I will believe it when I see it, is what he said, basically.
Right, I just never heard it called Doubting Thomas, I guess.
Yeah, not the book, the person.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, I do think that those are interesting. I just don't really spend a lot of time on.
All right, so we are, according to my YouTube timer,
12:01.
About 15 minutes away from finishing the video, and if my math is correct, that means that we've got another hour of stuff to talk about. Yeah, I've not looked at the Alex O'Connor stuff. You did have me looking at some Alex O'Connor stuff on free will, but that's another topic for another time, Ed. All right, so let's put a little bow on this. We'll finish the final 15 minutes and then move on into part 3, I believe, next week. By the way, we are moving officially to Tuesdays because I have an opportunity on Mondays that I can't pass up, and Billy has been so kind as to agree to move it to Tuesdays. And we're on Tuesday now, so hey, here we are. I would like to look at some Alex O'Connor stuff, Billy, sometime, because he's one of the most visible atheists that, or maybe at this point he's kind of moved more to an agnostic place because he says he's just I mean, I kind of understand it because at least if you claim agnosticism, at least you can say, maybe to just about anything. But what's the Holy Week looking like for you?
It's been very busy. We have services every day at noon.
Yeah.
Thursday and Friday night, I have services that are kind of involved, and then of course, Easter Sunday is big, and then we have my group. The noontime service is kind of cool because we've got 7 pastors involved with 5 days for one to preach. So we only get 5. I got a chance not to have to preach this time, and it's 2 black women, 1 black man, 1 white man, and 3 old white guys. And we've got these diverse churches, and none of them. My church is the biggest, and we average about 50. So it's small churches with big buildings in a couple of cases, and we had about 60 people today, and it's kind of cool. They come have a short service, and then we go have lunch.
Well, hey, that's a.
And we're getting this year something we hadn't gotten before. Some folks that come to our free breakfast are coming to that as well.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, Ed, about agnostic atheist. I'm just saying he uses the word agnostic a lot more in his description of himself, from what I've seen recently.
I don't think my sister would ever use agnostic.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm an atheist. Alex O'Connor is an atheist, but he uses agnostic for a lot of things because I think he is smart in saying that there's a lot of things I don't know. So agnosticism is an easy claim, one that you can even say is a bit of a cop-out. He would even admit to that. But that's neither here nor there.
And if you just take the word what it means, not in the context of religion or faith.
Yeah. That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah, because it's an adjective here.
I think he recently has become. I mean, he's an atheist, but it's like he's more recently. I think he's trying to take a softer approach and at least to maybe help himself hear arguments because he is a debater. But nonetheless,
he's not the guy in Nashville, is he?
No, I don't think he's in Nashville. He's an English guy from Oxford, I think, educated.
Well, that's not Nashville.
No. But that doesn't mean he couldn't be in Nashville. He could be in Nashville. I mean, everybody's in Nashville. So yeah, Billy's got a big week this week. He's doing breakfasts and lunches and a lot of preaching and any Easter egg hunts.
I spoke badly at an Easter egg hunt the other day, Saturday. Monday. It was going to be Saturday.
You said there's not a lot of kids in your church, though.
Not in my church. This was a city thing. The Bluefield held it, and there was a lot of kids. And they were going to do it Saturday morning, but it was really cold. So then they did it Monday evening when it was nice and warm.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I'm not the best to talk to children, so.
Well, I mean, maybe 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds.
I'm better with youth than I am children.
Yeah, 1989. Yeah, right. Who can afford egg hunts? That's right. That's hilarious. I didn't even think about that.
There were plastic eggs with
plastic eggs. Man. In them. Even then, though, the tariffs.
They had to use Hershey's.
That's right.
That's right.
We got to American-made plastic eggs and chocolate to make this
none of that good
cost-effective Easter egg hunt. All right, guys. Thank y'all for hanging out with us. We are going again. Next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we'll finish out this and then move on into number 3 and try to get as far along as we can. Billy, again, I thank you for all your time and expertise. For all the chatters, thank y'all for commenting and spurring along the conversation. And also, I'd like to say a special shout out to Finland because that's crazy that we're talking to people from Finland right now. So, and
I did a funeral with 10 different countries at it. Zoom.
I mean, hey man, you're big time, Billy.
And one of the speakers was from Finland.
Nice. All right, guys, thank y'all very much. We will see you next week.